It all started when the neighborhood HOA, led by Karen, decided to implement a new parking enforcement initiative. At first, it sounded reasonable, something about preserving property values and ensuring safety. But in reality, it was just another excuse for Karen to wield power over the community. Karen had always been a self-appointed dictator of the HOA, micromanaging everything from the color of front doors to the types of plants allowed in flower beds. This time, her focus was on vehicles. She pushed through a new rule, claiming it would prevent eyesores and clutter in the neighborhood. The rule? No oversized vehicles parked in driveways overnight. She argued that trucks, work vans, and large SUVs ruined the neighborhood aesthetic. But strangely, she only seemed to enforce this rule on people she didn't like. I had lived in this neighborhood for years and had never had an issue before. My truck was always parked neatly in my own driveway, not blocking sidewalks, not violating any pre-existing HOA rules. It wasn't a junker or an abandoned vehicle. It was my daily driver. But to Karen, none of that mattered. She had decided that my truck was a problem. I heard about her complaints through the neighborhood forum, where she left passive-aggressive messages about certain residents who think they're above the rules. It was obvious she was referring to me, but I ignored her. I knew the rules better than she did, and my truck wasn't in violation of anything. Little did I know, Karen wasn't going to stop at just complaining. She had already put a plan in motion to get my truck towed. The morning started like any other. I grabbed my coffee, stepped outside, and was met with a sight that made my blood boil. My truck was gone. At first, I thought maybe it had been stolen. But then, as I looked around, I saw a bright orange HOA violation notice stuck to my front door. The words "Vehicle removed for HOA violation" were printed in bold letters. I scanned the notice and saw the reason listed. Oversized vehicle improperly parked in residential area. Violates HOA guidelines. Owner was warned but failed to comply. Warned? I had never received a single warning. I immediately called the HOA office, but of course, it went straight to voicemail. That's when I saw her, Karen, smugly watering her perfectly manicured lawn, pretending not to notice me. I walked straight over. "Karen, did you tow my truck?" She gave me a fake concern look. "Oh, I don't handle enforcement personally," she said sweetly. "The HOA just follows the rules, and you unfortunately broke them." I clenched my jaw. "I didn't break any rules." Karen shrugged. "Well, the tow company disagreed. If you have an issue, take it up with them." I took a deep breath. She had no idea. No idea who she had just messed with. Because I owned the very tow company she had called. And she was about to learn that payback was coming. Karen stood there, arms crossed, grinning as if she had just won some petty battle. She had no idea she had just stepped onto a landmine. Instead of arguing, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart, the manager of my tow company. "Hey, Mark. Got a situation. Someone towed my truck this morning. Can you check who authorized it?" There was a brief silence before Mark responded. "Wait, your truck? The black F-150? That was you." "Yeah, and I want to know who sent the order." I could hear Mark clicking through files. Then he chuckled. "Man, you're going to love this. The request came straight from your HOA board." I smirked. "And which company did they call for the job?" Mark burst out laughing. "Ours." I let that sink in for a second before saying, "All right, here's what we're going to do." Karen was still standing there, watching me with a superior expression, probably thinking I was on the phone begging the tow company for mercy. She was in for the shock of her life. I kept my face neutral as I spoke into the phone, making sure Karen couldn't hear me. "Mark, I want my truck back immediately, but don't bring it here just yet. Instead, I need you to tow something else." "Oh." Mark sounded intrigued. "Yeah, Karen's car." Mark let out a low whistle. "You sure about that?" "Dead sure." I turned to Karen, who was watching me with a smug expression. She probably thought she had ruined my day, that I would be forced to bow down to the HOA's ridiculous rules. Instead, I gave her the biggest smile and said, "Thanks for reminding me about the HOA rules, Karen. They apply to everyone, right?" She scoffed. "Obviously." "Good. Because your car is in violation." Her smile faltered. "What?" I pulled out my phone again, opening the HOA rulebook. "Your car has been parked in a restricted zone for over 2 hours. That's an immediate tow." Karen's face twisted in confusion, then anger. "That's ridiculous." I park there all the time. I shrugged. Rules are rules. Oh, and funny thing, turns out I own the tow company you called this morning. And I just gave them a new job. Before she could even respond, the sound of an approaching tow truck filled the air. Karen's face went completely pale. Karen's eyes darted toward the street as the tow truck rumbled into view. The same tow truck she had called to haul my vehicle away was now pulling up in front of her house. Her expression turned from confusion to panic as she saw the driver step out, Mark, my longtime friend and employee. He gave me a knowing smirk before turning to Karen. All right, ma'am. Looks like this is the vehicle I'm towing today. Karen spluttered. No. You're supposed to be towing his truck, not mine. I held up my phone, my expression completely calm. Oh, but I just confirmed with HOA records, your car is in violation. It's been in this spot too long, and it's partially blocking a fire lane. That's an immediate tow. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. This is insane. You can't do this to me. Mark shrugged. I just follow orders. You called us, remember? Karen whirled toward me, rage twisting her face. You can't possibly get away with this. I'll fight it. I tilted my head. Sure, you can take it up with the HOA board, which I happened to be on. Her expression froze. Realization hit her like a truck. She had just tried to use HOA rules against the wrong person. But I wasn't done yet. I crossed my arms and said, and by the way, Karen, there's another little rule you forgot about. Her voice was barely a whisper now. What? I smirked. HOA board members have final say on appeals. So good luck with that. Mark chuckled as he hooked up Karen's car to the tow truck. She was completely speechless. And just like that, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA was about to get a taste of her own medicine. The second Karen saw Mark start attaching the tow truck's hook to her car, she snapped. You can't do this. This is illegal. I'll call the police, she shrieked, stomping her foot like a spoiled child. I casually leaned against my truck, completely unfazed. Go ahead, Karen. Call them. Her phone was already in her shaking hands. She dialed 911 with fury in her eyes, barking into the receiver. Yes, a man is trying to tow my car illegally. I need officers here now. I just smirked, knowing exactly how this would play out. Mark, still hooking up her car, gave me a knowing look and whispered, this is going to be good. A few neighbors had gathered nearby, watching the chaos unfold. Some had their phones out, recording. They knew exactly who Karen was, the HOA tyrant who made everyone's life miserable. And now she was getting a taste of her own rules. As she paced back and forth, mumbling about lawsuits, HOA bylaws, and how she was above all this, I casually reminded her. Karen, you do realize that according to HOA rules, illegally parked vehicles get towed immediately, right? She stopped mid-step. But, this is different. I raised an eyebrow. How so? She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no different. She had spent years weaponizing the rulebook against everyone else. But now that it was being used against her, she couldn't handle it. And the best part, I knew exactly what would happen when the cops arrived. Karen stood there fuming, arms crossed, pacing back and forth as we waited for the cops. I, on the other hand, remained perfectly calm. Mark had finished hooking up her car, and now all that was left was to watch the drama unfold. Minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing but sirens off. Officers stepped out, taking the scene, Karen red-faced and seething, and me leaning against my tow truck with a smirk. The lead officer's eyes landed on me first. Hey, your name. What's going on? Karen's jaw dropped. They knew me. I gave a casual nod. Oh, nothing much. Just enforcing HOA parking violations. You know, standard procedure. The officer chuckled. You guys towing another one. That's the 3rd this week. Karen's face turned a shade of purple. What? No. He's towing a white car illegally. This is harassment. I want him arrested. The officer glanced at me, then at Mark, then back at Karen. Ma'am, can you explain exactly what's illegal here? She jabbed a finger toward me. He's not allowed to tow my car. This is private property. I am on the HOA board. I calmly pulled out my phone and opened up the HOA rulebook, the same one Karen had weaponized against countless residents. I scrolled down to the exact parking rule, she had enforced on so many others and held it up. Section 12, Article 3. Any vehicle in violation of HOA parking restrictions is subject to immediate removal by the authorized tow company under HOA contract. Karen froze. The officer took a look at my phone and then turned back to her. Ma'am, this looks pretty clear to me. He's following the rules. Karen was shaking with rage. But he can't. He doesn't own the company. The HOA is supposed to hire the towing service. I cut her off. Actually, Karen, I do own the company. Silence. The officer raised an eyebrow. Wait, you're the owner. I nodded. Yep. The contract your HOA signed? It's with my company. That means I have full authority to enforce this rule. Karen looked like she had been physically struck. The realization dawned on her she had no power here. She had spent years bossing people around with this exact rule, and now it was being used against her. She turned to the officer for backup. You have to do something. The officer sighed. Ma'am, there's nothing illegal happening here. You called us for a false complaint. If you don't calm down, we'll have to consider this a disturbance. Karen's lips quivered, her fists clenching. I could see the defeat sinking in. But she wasn't done yet. She had one last desperate move left. She threw her final tantrum. Karen was cornered, and she knew it. But instead of admitting defeat, she did what Karens do best. She doubled down. She threw her hands in the air and started screaming. This is an outrage. I'm going to sue you. You can't do this to me. The officers exchanged looks, unimpressed. One of them reached for his radio, clearly already over her theatrics. But Karen wasn't finished. She turned to the small crowd that had gathered, because by now, neighbors had started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. Do you all see this? She bellowed. This man is stealing my car. This is abuse. This is illegal. Some neighbors shook their heads, whispering among themselves. Others crossed their arms, watching with amusement. Karen had made enemies out of plenty of them over the years. One woman in the crowd, an older resident named Linda, smirked. Karma's AB asterisk asterisk. Huh, Karen? Karen wheeled on her. How dare you? I have rights. Linda shrugged. So, do the people whose cars you towed last year. Didn't seem to bother you then. I couldn't help but grin. Even her own neighbors weren't on her side. One of the officers sighed and pulled out a notepad. All right, ma'am, that's enough. Do you want to file an actual police report, or are you just making a scene? Karen's face went from red to pale. Filing a false police report was a serious offense. If she officially claimed that I had stolen her car when the tow was perfectly legal, she could be looking at real consequences. She froze. She wanted to keep fighting, but she also didn't want to risk legal trouble. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsure of what to do. Finally, she gritted her teeth and snapped, Fine. But this isn't over. She spun on her heel and stormed off, leaving her car behind. The officers turned to me. Do you still want to tow it? I nodded. Absolutely. Mark didn't waste any time. With a quick nod from me, he secured the final straps, got in the tow truck, and pulled away, taking Karen's precious car with him. I watched as Karen stomped back toward her house, humiliated. She had spent years making life miserable for the neighborhood, abusing the very same HOA rules she thought would protect her. But today, she learned the hard way that she wasn't untouchable. And the best part, her own rules had been used against her.